out upon us the power of your love. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue and the abandoned and forgotten of this earth. We ask this in your name, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. So, before we start, let's have a little group participation. This is how I love starting my college classes. I'm going to give you a number, and I want you all to tell me what this number is, all right? 2,949,370. Any guesses what that number is?
The number of pounds of plastics that have been recycled?
That's actually pretty good. I'll give one other guess. You're very close. Oh, good. I was just going to say it's a lot higher. This is the number of pounds of trash collected weekly by the city of Cincinnati. So let me give you another. You guys are doing a good job. 879,290. 879,290. Any guesses? I see a lot of people that haven't guessed, but they just don't want to say, yeah.
Pounds of recycling.
Fantastic. Pounds of recycling collected in the city of Cincinnati every week. Fantastic. Okay, so now we're in the mode. So on behalf of the Healthy Growth team of the Jesuit family, I want to welcome you this afternoon. I'm Mark Homenecki, a 25-year parishioner here at St. Xavier, and I, along with the rest of the team, and the team can stand up just so you can see who they are. Tim Sever, somewhere on there. Nick Dietrich, I see over there. Paige Grant, all right. And Alicia Alceri is right there. This team and I are thrilled to have you all down here. We are really excited for what the panel is going to talk about today, talking from the theological and down to the extreme and very, very practical. So, without further ado, let me have the panelists introduce themselves for a few minutes, and we'll jump right on in. You want to start us off?
Yeah, my name's Bob Gedert, and I had a 45-year career in recycling, retired in 2017, and began teaching climate change at Xavier University. And most of my career, I was involved in optimizing recycling programs around the nation and creating cost efficiencies so that recycling is cheaper than landfilling. So that was my primary objective.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good to be with you. I'm Bill Madges. I am Professor Emeritus of Theology and the former chair of the Theology Department at Xavier University. I retired in 2024. And in my last 2 years at Xavier, I was also the director of the Bergman Center for Dialogue, so from 2021 to 2023. And in that role, I was responsible for leading Xavier University's creation of a Laudato Si action plan.
Hi everybody, my name is Elise Erhart. I am the outreach specialist for Hamilton County Resource, which if you're not familiar with that, you probably aren't. It's the solid waste management district for Hamilton County. So I will be giving more of the county local government perspective on all things reduce, reuse, and recycle as we go through here today.
Spectacular. That is a hard-hitting panel. I am very excited to hear this. So let's jump right in. So I'd like to start with Bill. Hey, Bill, can you explain, kind of refresh for some of us, Laudato Si, because I think that'll help frame our discussion this morning.
Okay, so Laudato Si is a major encyclical that was written and published by Pope Francis 10 years ago in 2015. If you have not read it, let me tell you, it is long. So it's in English, 72 pages, single space, excluding footnotes. And to give you some idea, to kind of condense this, it's written in 6 chapters. And the first chapter talks about what is happening to our common home. And here's where Pope Francis addresses issues of pollution and climate change, loss of biodiversity, global inequality. The second chapter is entitled The Gospel of Creation. And that gives kind of the theological grounding for what Pope Francis is doing and what he's calling us to respond to. So it talks about the wisdom of biblical accounts and how it gives us guidance for how we should live as human beings in this created world. Chapter 3 is about the human roots of the ecological crisis. It talks about the technocratic paradigm and spends some time talking about the negative effects of anthropocentrism. So namely, making humanity the kind of the primary, almost the exclusive center of how we understand the world and life. Chapter 4 is on integral ecology. So if you take away 2 words, I'd like you to take away those 2 words from the encyclical. So integral, making something whole, and ecology, talking about our home, the Greek word for ekos, for our home. And the point is that Francis wanted to emphasize that everything is interconnected and interrelated. We, as human beings, with the rest of the natural world, other creatures, etc., and our connection to earth, to air, to water, etc. And the challenge he gives us is namely, how can we go forward to promote the well-being of all of those aspects of interrelated reality? Chapter 5, he looks at some lines of approach and action at the local, national, international level of what's being done to try to address the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation. And then chapter 6 deals with ecological education and spirituality. It's in this chapter where he calls us to choosing a new lifestyle, talks about ecological conversion. And one of the things I like towards the end of that section, as you would expect from the Pope, he goes back to the understanding of the Trinity as a guide for how we should think about how to live our life in this created world. And his point was that if you think about the Trinity as a doctrine that causes a lot of people to scratch their heads, so you have diversity, right? Father, Son, and Spirit, they're not exactly the same person. So the diversity of creation, our diversity in the created world, but connected together in our ultimate substance so that we are connected and cannot be separated. And so the nature of reality, so if you think as Christians, we talk about being made in the image of God, if that image is Trinitarian, it means we are made for relationships and interrelationships in all of its diversity. It's a really, from my perspective, really beautiful way to kind of bring that encyclical to an end. The second thing I'll mention is, I don't want to spend a lot of time, we can talk more about the theological roots in chapter 2, but then 5 years after the encyclical came out, so in 2020, the Vatican then launched the Laudato Si action plan. And the action plan was namely, how do we take the values, the ideas of the encyclical, and try to implement them? And this is where the Pope basically made a call to every Catholic parish, every Catholic elementary school and high school, every Catholic university to develop their own Laudato Si action plan. And out of these 6 chapters of the encyclical, they derived 7 goals, and I'll just mention very briefly to you. So the first goal was how to respond to the cry of the earth. The second was how to respond to the cry of the poor. And here you see the idea of integral ecology, right? You know, there's a statement in Laudato Si that namely, it doesn't make sense to be committed to preserving species that are becoming extinct because of what we're doing to the planet if we're not also concerned about what's happening to other human beings, what's happening to their culture, their ability to live in poverty. The third goal is ecological economics. So namely, how do we go about a sustainable life? How do we deal with our consumption? Goal 4, adoption of a sustainable lifestyle. 5 is ecological education. How do we educate ourselves to live differently? 6 is ecological spirituality. So really focusing on creation-based liturgy, prayer that can inspire and nurture us. And then finally, how do we promote community resilience and empowerment? The idea, this is part of Catholic social teaching, instead of having solutions to social problems simply coming from some high point, whether it's the Pope or the government, saying, no, how do we start from the grassroots level and empower communities to be resilient as they address the challenges that face us in the environment.
A couple of things pop to mind. First is the fact that we are all here and doing what we're doing now. One thing I failed to mention is this is part of a series of presentations, immersions, and career experiences focused on the ecological spirituality of Laudato Si, embracing God's creation. So the fact that it was one of the 6 that were noted, and so as a parish family, we are indeed trying to live that out. Also talking about sustainable lifestyle, I will share at the end the team and some of the things that we tried to do, or at least the debates and discussions we had as we were pulling this together, again with that attempt to do something. Hey Bill, one other question for you. Was this the first time that the Catholic Church had addressed the climate change or the environment, or was this a continuation of things that the church had been doing?
Yeah, this is not the first time, but it's clearly the most detailed and substantive attempt. So you can go back to Pope John Paul II, who raised issues about, namely, humanity has to see its place in terms of the wider created world. Pope Benedict XVI, right? So the predecessor before Pope Francis. And he actually acted on some of those things in terms of wanting to get solar panels, at the Vatican installed, etc. So previous popes have mentioned and have encouraged us to take seriously the challenges that face us, but it's really Pope Francis who has developed it tremendously. And I think you can appreciate, I'm just thinking of Mass that I participated in before coming down here, the first song that we sang with words from St. Francis of Assisi, which is a name that Pope Francis took because of concern for, our brother and our sister, the moon, the sun, for the water and the air. Francis really made this kind of a key aspect of his papacy, and it will be his legacy.
Fantastic. Let's switch locally. We're going to bounce around throughout the discussion this morning, so let's bring it a little home. And Bob or Elise, we, at the outset, I noted a couple of numbers. 23% of the 3.8 million pounds of stuff collected every week is recycling. Back to the class. Anybody have an idea what the national average is? So ours here locally is 23% of all the stuff collected is recycled. National average?
5.
15.
It's actually 32%. But it begs the question, locally, why are we not above the national average? So just under a third of the municipal solid waste is recycled or composted, but we're about 10% lower than that. So either Elise or Bob, you guys want to give some thoughts on why?
So one of the biggest concerns is when we have a city like this. City of Cincinnati is fantastic. They really try everything they can to improve recycling, and we are so close to getting composting going as well at some point, much larger scale composting. But the trickiest thing with such a wide population throughout the county specifically is that we have very spread out municipalities, and everybody seems to be doing their own thing, which is awesome, but it's creating little pockets, and nobody's really talking and communicating when we could be sharing a whole lot more. We could be sharing a lot more ideas, overlapping, really teaming up to do more. And as a county, the county entity, we're really trying to get more people almost networking with each other and doing more as communities, as small pockets. But what we're seeing is those small pockets doing great little things. We just need to get everybody more on board together instead of doing all the work themselves and creating almost more work in a sense for everybody versus really teaming up, using everybody's knowledge and skills and building a stronger infrastructure. So I think that's one of the biggest things is
Yeah, and tagging along with that, just addressing the city of Cincinnati, and that is, there's two numbers I wanted to add to your numbers there. And that is the set-out rate. The it's one of the ways we measure an effective recycling program is how many people are setting out their recycling cart on the recycling day, the designated recycling day. And it depends on the neighborhood is the answer. And anywhere in Cincinnati, it could be anywhere from 36% to 75, 76%. So we have some good neighborhoods that are doing quite well. We have some neighborhoods that need help in getting the residents to set out their recycling cart and start using recycling. A second number that is actually more hidden and more difficult to deal with is what we call capture rate. And that is the amount of recyclables captured in each household that is recycling. So if you are recycling, are you recycling 100% of what can be recycled? And the average capture rate in Cincinnati is 50%, which means 50% of the household recyclables goes in the recycling can, and 50% of recyclables in that household goes in the trash can. So there needs to be a good, effective campaign to show people it should not go in the trash. Piggybacking on your comments there are how many municipalities are there? 48 municipalities in this county with 48 different types of recycling message. And that is confusing. And it is, especially if you travel from neighborhood to neighborhood, city by city, with your relatives and your friends, and talk about recycling, what is recyclable in your own community may vary. And we need a unified approach. All of our recyclables goes to the same recycling processor, Bromkey. We should be talking the same language across the board. So that's one of the challenges.
When you build on your capture rate, that's fascinating, capture rate. One of the things that the team has heard from neighbors and others, that the local waste collection companies, Rumpke for example, in fact collect all waste and dispose and bury everything all together. And separating waste and recycles is not practical or not worth my effort. Address that.
I think we
We can both do this.
Yeah. I can absolutely guarantee that if you're setting your recyclables out in the proper recycling container, it will get recycled. There are conditions at the recycling MRF where they pitch out what we call wish recycling. Items that are not designated by Rumpke that cannot be recycled. They'll pitch those and put those in the trash. And that's averaging, what, 18, 20%? About 20% of what they're collecting, which I consider a bit high. From an operational efficiency point of view, that should be less than 10%. So we need to make sure we're not doing wish recycling by saying, well, it's not on the list, but they should be recycling it anyway.
I'm not going to put that thing in.
So I'm just going to make them recycle. It doesn't work that way. It does not work. And it ends up in the trash. And it's a glorified trash collection system with some expense to it. So I would say to that question, it really does get recycled. If you're following the rules, you're putting the right things in the recycling bin, and you're doing the right thing, it does get recycled. It does not go to a landfill. It has economic return to the collector and processor. They don't want to throw money in the landfill. So it is important that we recognize that we build local industries by our recycling, and it does actually get through the system if we're following all the rules.
I've got a question. When it comes to recycling, you were talking about percentage rates and everything. Is it more where people who own their own homes are recycling more than people who are living in apartment complexes, or even the economical differences from each area? What are the percentage rates on each one of those? Is that a good question, I hope?
That's very, very.
It's actually a great question, and you tripled with my next question. Good.
Sorry.
Bob answered exactly what I was gonna say about the contamination. So if you put the right stuff in the recycle bin, it will get recycled. If you put the wrong stuff in, it will be trashed. That's just how it is. That's how the process goes. But to your question about the economic differences and living in a home that you own versus an apartment complex, we've seen apartments for the most part. I don't know the percentage, so I'm not going to give you a percentage, but multifamily apartment complexes or homes, do not recycle for the most part. Kind of a general, most of them do not recycle, and if they do, there's too much contamination and most of it gets trashed anyways, because the residents are not educated on it, or they're not aware, or they don't care, whatever the case may be. But those who do have recycling at multifamily complexes, typically the recycling rates are very low. And those who have their own homes have a higher recycling rate, but still, we keep seeing over and over, there's still high contamination rates too, where people are wish cycling, as Bob said. That is an actual term that we use, wish cycling, of people putting incorrect things into the recycling. So there is a big economic difference, especially when it comes to access. So those who have their own homes frequently, and again, this changes throughout all the 48 municipalities, there's different systems for some of the municipalities pay for recycling, and people essentially get free recycling kind of built into their, city taxes and whatnot. But others have to subscribe and pay for their own recycling. So when it comes to that, you better believe only the people who really care and can afford it are going to do it. So there's definitely an access issue, but across the board, regardless of where you live, the education is still lacking in general. Does that kind of answer your question?
Before, can I just add something? And correct me if I have this wrong, but it's sort of like, you're probably familiar seeing what's called the chasing arrows symbols in plastic, right? So the green thing that looks like a triangle. And I think a lot of people think, well, as long as I see the chasing arrows things, it's recyclable and you throw it into your bin. And that's not necessarily the case because, right, there's a number system telling us what kind of plastic it is, and not every municipality actually recycles everything. So I think it's generally the case, if you see a number 1 or a number 2, most places are going to recycle that. Is that accurate or not?
Yeah.
But Bob's saying yes, and you're, okay.
Let me give
Great.
But it's important to
That's a Dan knows
You're
out
right,
there.
you're right. It's important to pay
Shake hands.
attention.
This is great.
It's important to pay attention to the numbers. Bill's right there. That's very true. However, and I'm going to say this is my job. So we have across all 48 municipalities, what can be recycled, like Bob said, is the same. It all goes eventually to the Rumpke Materials Recovery Facility. That's what it's called in St. Bernard, where all the recycled materials go. And then they get shipped off to their factories. But the only 4 kinds of plastics that you can recycle are based off of shape right now. And it's based off of shape, but also kind of the numbers, but based off of the shape, and truly the only things that you can recycle are plastic bottles, plastic jugs, plastic tubs, and plastic to-go cups. And forgive me, I forgot my bag at my apartment today with all of my stuff in it to show you all. But I will actually, I'll get you all at some point a bunch of magnets that has the entire list of what you can put in the recycling. I will have that to you by next week, because I forgot it. But bottles, jugs, tubs, and to-go cups. That's it. That is all you can recycle. So just, if you've got those 4 things, that's it. Curbside. Yes, thank you. So Rumpke recycling bins. You can only do bottles, jugs, tubs, and to-go cups. I'm thinking you all are thinking of the hub? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
That's a separate thing for the hard to recycle plastics.
So that does raise a point that I've known for a while, which is, why is it that Rumpke can't take those other items? And who negotiates that contract with them?
Really great question. Bob.
I'd like to address 3 issues: multifamily, the plastics, and then the latest question on markets, recycling markets. And so on multifamily, in Cincinnati, and I'm not speaking countywide, I'm speaking just Cincinnati, 50% of the residents live in apartments and 50% in single-family households. The recycling program is set up for single-family households. And they are attempting, the city is attempting to pilot on multifamily recycling. I've been contracted to help the city on expanding that program into multiple multifamily settings across the city. So if you live in the city in an apartment, talk to me. My work on that is supported by a grant from the Recycling Partnership. And so it's not city dollars, it's a grant that's coming in to help us increase multifamily recycling. It definitely is a sore spot within the recycling, and it's one of the reasons why we only recycle 23%. It's because multifamily is not in the picture there. The second is plastics, and I wrote a book on plastics coming out on November 14th. And it's called Untangling Plastics. And I address, in chapter 3, I address the coding system, the actual chasing arrows with a number in it. That number, the short story, you can read the longer story in the book. The short part of that story is that recyclers across the country did not create that symbol. The plastics industry created that symbol. And they lobbied state legislatures to create legislative mandates to encode plastics. And so a majority, more than 3/4 of the states, including Ohio, require the labeling of plastics, even though recyclers across the country absolutely hate that coding system. It does not reflect what is recyclable and what isn't. It's an industry push to say every plastic is recyclable, which is entirely false. So if you look at your chairs that you're sitting on, that's plastic. That is plastic that cannot be recycled. There is no markets for that
You can
plastic.
put that in the bin.
You cannot put that in the
Wish, it's a wish plastic.
It's a wish, yes, yes.
According to US EPA, only 9% of the created plastics in the US that are marketed are recycled, 9%. We have a 9% across the nation recycling rate. If you maximize all recyclable plastics, the cap you can do is 15% of created plastics. The other 85% is destined for the landfill anyway, or reuse, which I would promote, reuse. So plastics is problematic, it's confusing, people don't know what is recyclable and what isn't. I advise you to go on Rumpke's website, and it does list the types of plastics, as you noted, and they are form-shaped descriptions of the types of plastics. And I would stick close to those rules. Now, the third question was, why can't they recycle more plastics? And the answer is end markets. There isn't end markets for these other recyclables. Plastics is part of a business economy where you collect the plastics, you clean it up at the MRF, you package it up by certain categories, and then you ship it to industries that produce new products out of them. And if a product cannot be made out of that plastic, it is not recyclable. Film plastics is an example. The film plastic on your meat container at Kroger's is not recyclable, and there is no end market. So,
How is the hub taking?
how is it?
Why is the hub taking that?
The hub is taking certain types of plastics that Rumpke cannot collect, and they're finding niche markets. And it is fairly expensive to do that. That's why Rumpke isn't doing that. It's not a good economic plan for a recycling MRF. For a volunteer organization, they can afford to ship it. Some of those plastics are shipped to Houston, Texas. Some of them are shipped all over the nation to niche markets. When we lose that niche market, if that business goes out of business, then it's gone. We can't collect it. Styrofoam, polystyrene, styrofoam is one of those examples. It comes and it goes. We have a company in Mason, Ohio that recycles styrofoam right now, but it's got to be clean and it's got to be pre-consumer. They don't take post-consumer. Post-consumer means like your own coffee cups and from your own household. They take the pre-consumer styrofoam and it's got to be clean. And they have a market for it, but it's a limited market. And when that market dissipates, they can't collect it. And that's a unique market, not nationwide. So most people nationwide cannot recycle styrofoam. So that's an example of a very limited marketplace.
That is how I discovered the hub, because I was trying to recycle styrofoam.
Yep.
Hey, before I switch gears, Elise, let me go back to you, and a lot of questions around education and resources. So can you tell us a bit from the Hamilton County resource, where are places that citizens can go? Like, truly, I love the the recycling and reuse tool. I mean, anything tells what to do with it in various ways. So I saw that was one thing, but what are some of the other things that the folks can do to be educated?
Okay,
And then we'll
so
switch gears to something else.
to get yourself educated on what can and cannot be recycled, and not just that, but what maybe could go to the hub, or what could go to where you can take batteries, where you take whatever you're trying to get rid of, or, yeah, whatever you're trying to get rid of. The number one place, and he just mentioned it, is the Hamilton County Resource. If you go to hamiltoncountyresource.org, that's my little department's website. And our entire purpose is to educate and help people in the county. So our website is designed to help you find all your answers. So there's a number that you can call. It's our hotline number. There is a recycling and reuse. It's called a disposal locator tool. It pops up on our homepage. It pops up in multiple different ways. And it's a search tool where you can type in whatever you're looking to get rid of, and it will come up with at least 1 or 2 places, if not more, locally, that you could take your items as needed. Or it'll come up with, put it in your curbside bin, or put it in the trash. So we'll give you the options. But in addition to that, there's other things that you can do. There's always information on, like, the Ohio EPA websites. There is some information on the city of Cincinnati's website. They have some really, really cool information on services. But if you want to stay offline and you want to do something else, if you want to speak to a person, definitely call the Hamilton County Resource number. It's all over our website. If you want it right now, it's 513-946-7766. If you are ready, I see her ready to talk. But you can call that number. You can also get any kind of recycling education through me for free at any point. I do recycling seminars. I do recycling lunch and learns, whatever group that you have. It doesn't matter if it's business, nonprofit, residential, community group, doesn't matter. If you want to learn about it, that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to be teaching all the time. So you can always request a seminar. You can go on our website, you can call the number. You can also go on a tour of Rumpke's Material Recovery Facility. I think, Alicia.
We were trying, but there's like a huge wait.
It's a huge wait list, yes. It's a huge wait list, however, I have an in. So we can get you potentially on a tour of the Rumpke Materials Recovery Facility where all the recycling goes. The MRF, Bob said that a couple of times, the MRF is the MRF Materials Recovery Facility. So we have tours of that. Eventually there's going to be some kind of tour of the hub where you can check that out. If you want to just get more information in general on all things environmental, we also have a bunch of seminars between the Hamilton County Resource. We have things about composting. We have things about reuse. There's all kinds of information out there, and it's not just me plugging Hamilton County Resource and the work that I do. I'm not trying to give myself more work all the time, but this is truly, if you want free information, that's your best bet. Free education. And I saw a hand go up. Yeah.
I have a question. So, are you done with your thought?
Am I done with my what?
Your thought?
Yeah, I'm done with my thought. I think what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of information out there. The hub has its own website with beautiful, well-listed things that you can take to the hub, like gorgeous website. There is Rumpke's website that has all the same type of information of what you can put in the curbside bins. It's truly, the website information is what I'm leading you towards, and if you don't want that, then call the phone numbers.
So my question is, there's so many different shapes for containers, and if I were to purchase something in one of these plastic shapes, which one is the most economically viable for going, for being recycled? So, like, which one do I choose so that it can be recycled? Or that's the first question. And then I was just curious if there is a item that is people put in the bin that they want to get recycled. Like, what's the number one item for that? So,
clam shells.
Like wish cycling.
The number one item, I'm sorry?
It's number one.
The number one. So the main item that people put in the recycle bins that they think should be recycled or they want to be recycled really bad is those plastic clamshells that berries and tomatoes come in, you know what I mean? Those type of things.
Number one.
They're number ones. Now, as we know, the numbers don't always mean everything because there are other number ones that you can recycle in the curbside bins. Just don't look at the numbers right now. Just
The hub
do
does
yourself a
take
favor.
Those clamshells.
The hub will take those clamshells.
Recently started.
They are the one place that will take those clamshells. So berries and tomatoes, those containers can go to the hub. That is the number one thing that gets put in the Rumpke recycling bins and cannot be taken. There's also plastic bags that get put in the Rumpke recycling bins, and that's bad. Those get tangled up really, that's a problem in the machinery at the materials recovery facility. People, I think, are slowly starting to get the hang of that one a little bit more, that is not recyclable unless you take it to the hub, or sometimes there's take-back programs at Kroger or various other grocery stores.
Yeah, in addressing the shapes of plastics, the Rumpke's been advertising recently that they like the narrow top. If you look at a container and it's got a narrower top than the base of the plastic container, and it has a lid on it, that's recyclable. And that might be soap containers, milk containers, bottle of Tide, 2 liter bottles, single-use plastic bottles, anything that has a narrower top with a screw lid on it. They also can take what they call tubs, and this is a recent addition that the city of Cincinnati bargained in, and they actually expanded it through their entire marketplace, is tubs, like margarine tubs and yogurt tubs. Those are new, and they are not narrow at the top, but they're in addition to what they generally collect.
Let me switch gears, just for a moment, and then we're gonna get back to the practical, but I want to elevate the conversation a bit. Another question to the group. April 1st, 1970. Does anybody know what April? Right, the first Earth Day. So a couple of stats. The first Earth Day. 20 million Americans, or about roughly 10% of the population at the time, took to the streets, parks, schools, to demonstrate the last, call it 115 plus years of industrial developments, negative impact on the environment, 1970. By the end of that year, there were a couple of things that had been established, or the years around that. The EPA, OSHA, the Clean Air Act was established, and the Clean Water Act followed 2 years later. Think about that, 1970. Okay, wow, that's fun, I have that in my notes, he says wow, yes. So we start with Bill. What was the church's position on the environment back then?
It wasn't quite prepared for that. So, okay, let's see. So John the 23rd died in 63, then it was Paul the 6th. So this would be during the time of Paul the 6th. So I would be hard pressed to actually identify a document, but even his predecessor, John the 23rd, particularly in Pacem in Terris, had talked about part of being at peace among human beings involves creating a harmonious environment in the world generally. And Paul VI picked up on that, but I'd be hard pressed to kind of identify specifically the document. There wasn't a lot of attention paid to it. I mean, just be very honest about it. But it had been mentioned.
Okay. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, just a quick bragging note, 1975, 5-year anniversary of the first Earth Day, I started my recycling career. So that's so, and I celebrate Earth Day every year as an anniversary date and try to do one green step new every single Earth Day. And that's something that I've honored throughout my life. I believe that my actions should portray what my voice says. And so I would encourage you to take action in your lives too, with a green step every once in a while, including on Earth Day.
Do you think that there are, or I guess not you think there are, because there are, what do you think are some of the current environmental issues that should have the same groundswell and the same pulling people onto the streets to say, this is wrong and we need to change and we need help. What do you all think those are today?
Since I have the microphone, I'll start. So the attempt or the desire by Elise Erhart, who's the director of the EPA, to rescind the endangerment finding, right? So that, as I understand it, that's basically the basis for all kinds of regulation that has come from EPA, kind of regulating what kind of emissions come from car tailpipes, what kind of emissions come out of factories, et cetera, and basically wants to rescind it completely. Okay, take away all of those regulations on the argument that when Congress passed the EPA clean they did not give the EPA authority to regulate all these things with regard to emissions. And I think, rescinding the endangerment finding will be terrible for human health and be terrible for the planet. It is.
I would go back a little bit in history on the EPA in that Richard Nixon created the EPA back in 1970. And one of their first tasks was to develop landfill rules. We had open dumps and burning back then. And one of the first tasks of EPA was to create regulations for landfills. And I was on that landfill rule writing committee. And we developed like the double liners and leachate collection and methane collection systems. Those rules have essentially not changed since the 70s. So we're now 2025, we're 50 years later, and those rules have not been upgraded to best available technology and understandings of how landfills work. And so one of the issues that I think is of today is that landfills do not protect the environment. They don't entomb the waste and protect us from air emissions and water contamination and land contamination. And so I would say one of the issues that I have on my plate is to upgrade landfill regulations. A second point, and an endangerment ruling really hurts in doing any new regulations, as well as existing ones. The second issue that I would pay attention to is fracking. And fracking does impact our climate. It creates carbon dioxide and methane emissions. And there is current state law that allows fracking under all state parks and under Lake Erie. And we should be protesting the expansion of fracking in the state because it harms the environment, it harms climate change, and it harms humans that live in those communities.
Fracking is what I was going to say about. This is an interesting one. This is less of, were you talking about laws that are kind of in place and regulations that are in place that we should be kind of fighting against, or are you just talking about any issues?
Any issues in general?
Okay. I'm going to name, the one main thing is food waste. Food waste is an absolute abomination that we're wasting food in general, especially when we have such a huge gap in food insecurity versus those who have plenty and those who have nothing and really desperately need food. So food waste is a huge issue, and one of the biggest, this is one of the few times that I think in residential households and like consumers are the ones that have the highest rate of waste. Normally we see things like in corporate or businesses have the highest, they're producing the plastics and they're doing all these things and they have the power, but consumers in the home with food waste, the home is where most food gets wasted. Whether you're in an apartment or a household, it doesn't matter. That's where most of the food gets wasted. And we have a 40%, it's roughly 40% of all food in the US gets wasted. Just across the board, available good food, 40% of it gets wasted. In the county, I don't know exactly the county numbers right now. All I know is food insecurity is high, and with those high rates of food waste, roughly 40% of the 40% of food waste is coming from households. So that's something to be aware of, something to watch out for, is to try not to waste the food that you purchase, when you do purchase food, do your best to use it up or send it to somebody who needs it. And I think food waste. Watch your food waste.
Throw it in a smoothie and just.
Throw it in a smoothie, throw it in a soup, throw it in a smoothie,
Yeah.
yeah.
We have a Jesuit parish family healthy earth team. I think to simplify things, I think we have two audiences. People who are here, who are engaged, recycling, et cetera, and people who are not. We have a meeting tomorrow night. What would be your suggestion in terms of, and our main mission is educational, where would you, as a panel, what would you say should be our priorities for the first group and the priorities for the second group?
It's a really good question. Particularly when it comes to engaging folks who are not normally engaged in the issue, the biggest pull always seems to be convenience. It's less about, I think, in a lot of ways, I used to think that it was all about like money and what was saving money. And that's part of it sometimes, but I think the biggest pull for a lot of people is what is convenient. And it's as simple as putting the recycling bin right next to the trash bin. And if it's just as convenient, somebody might make the decision, hey, I could recycle this. But when it comes to engaging a larger group that's not normally interested, somehow making it convenient for them. And I don't know exactly the answer for what might be convenient for people. If it's perhaps meeting them where they're at, if it's about potentially talking to the congregation during a mass or during an assembly or whatever event is going on that they might already be at. I've found that that's helpful, is meeting people where they already are, literally, like physically where they are at an event, or if it's where they are mentally, emotionally, meeting them at a spot where it's convenient. They're already in that space, they're already thinking about that topic, you want to meet them where they're at. So I'm not sure if that was a good answer to your question, but it's always about convenience.
I'll add something besides. Can you hear me okay? No.
It goes on and on.
It goes on, now, okay.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about people who are church members, Jesuit parish family, make a connection to Laudato Si, right? And I'll just give you one quote. So this is section 64, where Pope Francis writes, Christians in their turn realize that their responsibility within creation and their duty towards nature and the Creator are an essential part of their faith. And really try to make that message, that namely, if you have churchgoers, right, and kind of say, this is not just a kind of an add-on, it's like, well, you know, if I'm a green person, I'm going to care about recycling and the environment. Take this seriously, right? So chapter 2 of Laudato Si is all about kind of the biblical basis for a guidance for how to live. And I'll just give you one other quote. This is section 66, and it's talking about what we learned from the creation stories in Genesis. And it says, Genesis makes clear, this is a quote, that human life is grounded in 3 fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. And then it goes on to talk about sin. However, the harmony between Creator, humanity, and creation as a whole was disrupted by our presuming to take the place of God and refusing to acknowledge our creaturely limitations. And it goes on and it has, I think, some really powerful statements. It has statements like, we have to remember, we are not God. This is another quote. The earth was here before us and it has been given to us. And then it tries to help kind of the misinterpretation of one of the lines in the creation story where humanity is given, quote unquote, dominion over the earth. And it goes on and says, do not confuse dominion with domination. And dominion, being lord-like, means being an appropriate leader. And my final comment, I mean, those of you who know John's Gospel, so this is not directly in the encyclical, but if you know in chapter 13, it's a story of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, right? So you're all familiar, we do this at Holy Thursday. And it's beautiful in the Latin, in the Vulgate, right? Because Jesus wants to wash the feet, and Peter said, no, you're never going to wash my feet, wash all of me. He said, no, it's all your feet I need to wash. And Jesus does this lesson, and he says, and so you call me Lord and Rabbi. The Latin word for Lord is dominus, from which we get dominion, domination, etc. And he says, and truly I am the Lord, and look what I do. I serve and wash your feet. So it's reinterpreting dominion as being a leader and addressing the needs of those we encounter, including the entire world. So I think try to do the theological piece. It's a professional hazard.
And to tag along, everything is interconnected, to quote Bill. And I come from the perspective, in answering those two groups of people that you're addressing, I come from a perspective of sustainable materials management. And I don't call it waste management. I don't label our recyclables and our compostables as waste. They're materials to be managed. And I think to educate part of our audience here and beyond, we need to understand that it's all interconnected. What we do with our materials, and whether we capture it and regenerate new products, or work on waste reduction and reuse, which I consider a higher priority than recycling, that all is interconnected to climate change and does impact climate change. It impacts the environment and how the environment is treated, and most importantly, it impacts human lives and how the materials are created and used throughout their lifespan. We are impacting human lives. Think about Cancer Alley in New Orleans. And that is happening throughout the country, but that's the highlighted version there. So I come at it that everything is interconnected, and we need to understand that the actions we take in one sphere affect the actions in another sphere. They're all interconnected. For those that aren't fully engaged in recycling, not fully engaged in reuse and waste reduction, I work with a lot of populations of that nature, and what we need to do is give concrete examples of actions that can take place. Just physically outline what the actions are that people can take. Go from the theoretical to the actual physical, practical activities. And some people in their lives are really struggling paycheck to paycheck and having a hard time living in the current environment. The food waste issue is exactly a point right there that can impact those lives. Are we capturing excess food generation at the restaurants and at home and feeding our neighbors? And are we trying to reduce our food waste by buying smartly and consuming smartly? And are we composting instead of sending that food waste to the landfill? So examples that people can take.
Are there any other examples of very practical things? I mentioned earlier in your book, in chapter 10, you talk about one of my favorites, individual actions, one green step at a time.
Yeah.
And so either using that or stepping away from it, what are some of those things that this, to use your words, is very engaged group can do?
I'll start. Let's make sure we get the other voices in here too. And I work on, I created the One Green Step in Austin, Texas, and the residents really took off on that. You can feel overwhelmed by all the requests of environmental impacts and what you can do on environmental impacts. So take one green step, you do it, and then you move on to the next green step. And it's just like walking, one step at a time. And that's what I encourage, part of doing one green step is actually having leaders show what green step people can take. So telling people that they can go out and buy an electric car isn't gonna fly too far. I bought an electric car, but I can tell you it was a struggle to do so, economically. So not everybody can move at that pace, but everybody can move into waste reduction and reuse. And I would encourage practical steps on waste reduction and reuse prior to the concept of recycling.
Really quickly, I'm going back because I want to mention this. I got most of my family to pay attention to sustainable actions because of Laudato Si. I was so excited when that came out. And I have a huge Catholic family, and they were like, oh. I said, see? Both said it. So definitely something to try, worth a shot. And when it comes to practical actions, I'm gonna give a few quick things. So could I have a show of hands? Who has their own like backyard space? I know we're in the city right now. Okay. A fair number. If you've got your own backyard space, compost. That's absolutely one. It might sound intimidating. I'm not sure if some of you might already be composting, amazing. It sounds intimidating at first if you're not familiar with it or you haven't started. It's not hard. I promise it is not hard. It should not take a lot of extra time or stress. It's meant to be something that's good for you and your garden. So composting, and if you want a seminar on that, I can do that.
The Hamilton County Confessions of a
Confessions of a Composter
Just
blog.
watch that, yeah.
Very useful, very, very useful. And so composting, I would say is definitely one. Composting, reduce your food waste for sure. And that's buy less, eat what you've got. That's pretty basic. Make a shopping list. Make sure you know what you're buying and what you're eating. Another thing that I like to say to people, kind of a silly little one, but it makes a big difference. If you carry in your car or your purse or whatever bag you might carry around a leftover container or two that you can always reuse, like a reusable, I would say like a reusable Tupperware or glass container that you can take leftovers in. If you go out to a restaurant, that's something that you can always use. And it doesn't just have to be for food. You could just bring a reusable container that instead of putting leftover food in from a restaurant, you could also put your groceries or whatever you just purchased in instead of taking a plastic bag or just an extra container. So if you have a clear reusable container, always keep that in your home, car, bag, wherever you feel like it's a portable thing that you can take that in. Just having a reusable container does wonders. And that's very small, but it makes a difference.
Can I mention something too? I work with a group that pays attention to native plants and biodiversity. So what you plant in your yard can really, people start to see how that they can make an impact. They see birds and butterflies, so it gives them pleasure. So they're likely to connect to all other areas of recycling and continue. So I think they get something out of it, and it's likely to.
Thank you. Another practical and convenient step you can take is there are postcards on the table where you came in asking Governor DeWine to put a moratorium on fracking of the state parks.
Yeah.
Good?
I just had a couple of things to tell. I'm sure almost everybody here knows that the hub that they've referenced is the Cincinnati Recycling and Reuse Hub. And I found a better way to get to it rather than going downtown. Is go to the main post office, turn left instead of right, go down to Guest Street, turn right, go under the railroad things, and it's there on your left. So I was so delighted when I finally figured that out. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is two things that I really like about the hub. I took an old, lampshade there that had gotten sort of it was horrible. It was in horrible shape, and they took it. I couldn't believe it, but the guy said, oh, I can use the steel in this to do something. And another thing they've done is that I really respect is if you try to recycle something there that the city of Cincinnati will take, they won't take it.
Right.
They're very firm on that, which I respect hugely. So I always come home with a few little things, you know, that I can recycle in my home. So, anyway, I think that's all. I just am so crazy about the Cincinnati recycling and reuse hub.
Yeah, I am so happy you said that because that is absolutely one of my favorites as well. Last question in the back, I think I saw Sandy had her hand up,
Yes, I do.
and then we'll wrap.
Well, this probably will take a longer answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We used to compost at our house, and we drew a lot of animals into the yard that were digging up under different places, and so how do you teach people to manage that?
Critter mitigation is a great question. So one thing I say is get a rodent screen or make your own rodent screen. Usually they're maybe $15 online if you're gonna buy one. But it's just essentially a giant round or square mesh screen that you put under your compost pile or under your compost bin. It's just connected, you know, just right on the soil, right on the ground, and then you put your bin on top of it. And it prevents rats, rodents, snakes, anything that you might have. Snakes are normally not a compost problem, but rodents are typically a concern for some people if you happen to have more in your area. But a rodent screen usually does wonders, does the trick, and they cannot come up and like burrow underneath and get in your compost pile. So a rodent screen, you can Google it, look it up, or you make your own little mesh screen and stick it underneath your compost pile. All that matters is the little bugs can still get up in there and they're fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Also, make sure you're around your compost frequently enough because they like quiet, dark places to nest. And if you're out visiting your compost pile or dumping your food scraps or whatever, gardening, whatever the case may be, typically they don't want to live in that space if you're out and about and disturbing their peace. So that's another thing too. If you have a more passive compost pile, I know a lot of people do that, totally fine. That's where I would recommend the rodent screen for sure.
Yeah, just a quick note from practical experience in my world of backyard composting. I avoid putting meats and milk products in my compost because that draws the rodents. And I have had no rodent problems whatsoever. I like your suggestion on the mesh, but I might take you up on that offer, but it's pretty easy.
I think it often depends on truly what your yard space is. I know some people have more rodents and some people don't have that issue. You're lucky. Congratulations. But it definitely depends on what you put in. You don't want to make the compost pile smell really crazy. So dairy products, not natural. Those aren't going to break down in the same way as a fruit or veggie scrap. Same with meat and bones. Just think about what you're putting in and
Fish. No
is it
fish.
going to stink it up or is it going to be fine?
And I have a grove of trees in my backyard and field mice and raccoons and so forth. And they leave my compost pile alone, primarily because I watch what I put in it.
Hey, as we wrap, last two audience participation questions. If we scheduled a field trip off to Rumpke, now that we have it in,
Yes.
or to the recycling hub, is there interest to do that? Yeah? Excellent. Okay. I was just looking for at least one other hand to go with me, so. You know, as the panelists said today, start small, like the one small green step that can be done. So just a couple of quick things of note. The Healthy Earth team that I mentioned earlier that pulled this together, I did have to tell you a very quick story. As we were prepping, there had to have been 15 plus email messages going back and forth about what are we going to serve for lunch, how are we going to serve for lunch, and how do we think about that, and then that ensued into a 10+ minute conversation amongst the group of exactly what are we going to do when we get there. And we made some decisions like the plates that you're using, the cups that you're using, the fact that you have no name tags, which is something we typically do as a way to get to know everybody, so I hope you at least introduced yourselves. But we made those decisions, and so I think part of this is just being cognizant. You know, I told the crew I wrote out and typed out my notes and printed them. And I debated, do I print, do I use my iPad? Maybe it won't work, and I proved myself right printing this because the prayer at the beginning was twice as long, and my phone failed in the middle of it. And if it had been just on my iPad, it would not have worked. So I think think about those things, the fact that you even think about the fact that you're all here, other than pretty much, but we thank you for being here, is a great, great step. Two other things, the team, the Healthier Team, is always looking for new members. So if you have an interest, come talk to any of us. And if there are other ways that you think we as a parish family can do a better job and can truly live out Laudato Si, please come talk to us because we will continue to implement those things. And that brings us to the last final thing that you can do, which is thank the panelists. Extreme dedication to being done. So thank you all. Tim?
I want to thank Mark too for doing this. Very practical things. Hopefully you saw on the table as you walked in, we named it the biodiversity crisis. We have the native seeds. We're the last group. We did this at Bellarmine, we did it at Xavier University, and now we're doing it here. So take as many seeds as you want. And then that postcard is there. We're going to mail them all back to Governor DeWine as a pack. So if you took one, sign it, and leave it there at the table. There is a sign-up sheet if you want to be on our email list. And the last thing was the plates and cups. We are going to wash and reuse, including the plastic and silverware that we ran out of the network. So there's a bin here and a bin here. And thank you. Thank you.
Yes. I'm biting my tongue so hard because I wanted to interrupt so badly. Stop my phone. Meeting, the hub has the perfect for what goes in Rumsey and what they will take. It takes like 7 minutes, but if you go to the hub, it's a perfect, easy step. It's just and she introduces me saying, this is what we're not going to do, this is what it